The mountain storm raged with a fury that seemed to shake the very heavens. Rain did not fall so much as it was hurled, in great, stinging sheets that turned a winding path to the pine breeze care home into a river of churning mud. Lena, her body swathed in expensive, water-beaded silk, held a large umbrella aloft, its fine construction a stark contrast to the rustic, weathered gate before them. Beside her, leaning heavily on a simple wooden staff, was her father, Elder Tao. His frame, once strong enough to carry her on his shoulders through such storms, was now frail, diminished by time and a quiet sorrow. "It is for the best, Father," Lena said, her voice raised over the wind, the words feeling rehearsed and hollow on her tongue. "The nurses here are professionals. You will be comfortable and I will be able to focus on my business." The old man did not look at her. His eyes, clouded with age, were fixed on the distant, mist-shrouded peaks of the mountains he had called home his entire life. He did not argue. He had never argued with his daughter, not when she demanded the money for her city education, not when she sold the family home. A nurse, her face kind but weary, emerged from the main building with a second umbrella. She gently took Elder Tao's arm. As he transferred his weight from his daughter to the stranger, his thin, veined hand slipped from Lena's grasp. He turned his head just enough to meet her eyes, and his voice was a whisper, a fragile thread of sound almost torn away by the gale. "You will understand one day, my child." Then he was gone, led slowly into the dim interior. The heavy iron gates, ornate and cold, swung shut behind him. The metallic clang was a note of finality that echoed long in the sodden air. Lena stood for a moment, a strange tightness in her chest, watching the empty space where he had been. Then, with a sharp shake of her head, she turned and walked briskly to her waiting car, her fine leather shoes sinking into the mud, not once looking back. The village of Lena's birth lay nestled in the valley below, a collection of old stone houses and smoking chimneys. As her sleek, black car splashed through the main street, parting the puddles like a ship through a dirty sea, the women gathering at the central well fell silent. Their eyes, sharp and knowing, followed the vehicle's progress. "There she goes," one woman muttered, her hands pausing from drawing water. "The great Lena, who has become too important for the man who raised her." Another clucked her tongue, a sound of pure disapproval. "I remember when Elder Tao sold his last parcel of farmland, the one his family had tended for 5 generations. He sold his very history in that soil to pay for her fancy city education, for the silk she now wears." An elder woman, her face a beautiful, wrinkled map of a long life, sighed deeply, the sound carrying the weight of tradition. "A tree cannot grow without roots," she murmured, repeating the old proverb. "And a daughter who forgets hers will one day find herself lost in the storm, her wings broken." Their whispers were a chorus of judgment, carried on the wet wind, a sound Lena pretended not to hear as she stared straight ahead, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. As her car rounded the final bend, leaving the village behind, a sudden, violent gust, as if conjured by the collective displeasure of the mountainside, tore her car door open and snatched the delicate jade hairpin from her carefully styled bun. It was her late mother's most treasured heirloom, a cool, green stone her father had given her on their wedding day. Lena gasped, her hand flying in her hair, but it was too late. The pin vanished into the stormy gloom, swallowed by the rain and the shadows of the pine forest, a small, green sacrifice to her pride. Inside the Pine Breeze Care home, the world was hushed. The furious sounds of the storm were muted into a distant, rhythmic drumming on the roof. Elder Tao's room was small and simple, a narrow bed, a wooden chair, a small chest for his meager belongings. A single window looked out upon the brooding, mist-cloaked mountains, a view that was both a comfort and a reminder of his captivity. He sat on the edge of his stiff bed, his gnarled hands, once skilled at carving wood and tending soil, resting palms up on his knees. He did not cry or complain. A young nurse named and brought him a cup of weak tea, her movements brisk but not unkind. He thanked her with a gentle, fleeting smile that did not reach his eyes. When she left, Pulling the door almost closed behind her, the silence deepened. He turned his head slightly on the thin pillow, as if listening to a voice only he could hear, a sound from a great distance. "So," he murmured, a faint, almost imperceptible light touching the weary depths of his eyes. "You came after all. I knew you would not let me face this alone." Nursin, passing by his door on her way to the next room, paused. She heard the soft murmur of his voice and glanced in. She saw only the old man, sitting alone in the profound silence of the room, his lips moving soundlessly. But her eyes, sharp and trained for detail, were drawn to the worn wooden rocking chair in the corner. It was an old piece, donated and largely ignored, and it was moving ever so slightly back and forth, its runners creaking softly on the wooden floorboards, as if someone had just risen from a moment before. Weeks turned, and the vibrant autumn surrendered completely to the iron grip of winter. A hard frost settled each morning, painting the window panes of the care home with intricate, fragile landscapes of ice. Yet, one Tuesday, Nursin, making her morning rounds with a tray of medications, stopped dead in her tracks outside room 7. The small, barren patch of earth directly beneath Elder Tao's window, which had been frozen and lifeless just the day before, was now a riot of impossible color. Dozens of delicate white flowers, with petals like captured moonlight and centers the color of pale gold, bloomed defiantly against the crust of old snow. Their stems were a vibrant green, a color that belonged to spring. Bewildered, she pushed open his door, the question on her lips dying as a strange, comforting scent filled her nostrils. Not the sterile smell of antiseptic or boiled cabbage, but the clean, wild, salty air of the ocean, though the nearest shore was a journey of many days away. Elder Tao was sitting up in bed, looking at the flowers through the glass. He turned his gentle gaze to her. "She always did love the sea," he said softly, as if this explained everything. She said its vastness made her feel free. Nurse, and utterly bewildered, could only stare first at the vibrant, impossible blooms, then back at the serene old man. As she turned to leave, her mind racing for a rational explanation, a trick of a warm spring beneath the soil, perhaps a single, perfect white petal, detached by an unfelt breeze, floated through the slight gap in the window. It drifted on a current of air as warm as a summer day, turning slowly before landing with impossible gentleness on Elder Tao's open, wrinkled palm. He smiled, closing his fingers around it gently. In the bustling, smoky city far from the mountains, Lena's life was one of growing, glittering splendor. Her textile business, built on a foundation of sharp deals and relentless ambition, flourished. Her wealth multiplied, and she moved from a comfortable apartment to a grand, modern house on the hill, its windows overlooking the sprawling urban landscape. She filled it with lacquered furniture, imported rugs, and art that was chosen for its cost, not its beauty. When business associates or new, fashionable friends asked after her father, she would wave a dismiss, manicured hand. "Oh, he is perfectly comfortable in that home in the mountains. The air is good for him. I am far too busy with my enterprises to visit. He understands that a child must make their own way." But at night, in the profound silence of her expansive, cold bedroom, the doubts sometimes crept in, silent and insidious as shadows. They whispered of simpler times, of a small, warm house, and the sound of her father's laughter. One night, exhausted from a long day of negotiations, she fell into a fitful, troubled sleep. And she dreamed. She dreamed of her mother, not as the faded, sepia-toned photograph she kept in a drawer, but vivid and heartbreakingly real. She stood by the iron gates of the Pine Breeze Care home, her hands resting on the cold bars, her simple dress stirring in a wind Lena could not feel. Her face, still young and beautiful, was streaked with silent, glistening tears, and her eyes, dark pools of sorrow, were staring directly at Lena, piercing through the veil of sleep. A letter arrived at Lena's mansion a week later. The envelope was cheap and thin, the handwriting on the front shaky and frail, each stroke of the characters a small battle against trembling fingers. It was from her father. With a sigh of impatience, she slid it open. "My dearest Lena," it began, the formal old-fashioned greeting striking a chord of unwanted memory. Asterisk, the days are quiet here. The food is sufficient. The nurses are kind. I talk to your mother often. She sits with me in the afternoons when the light is golden, and we remember you as a little girl, chasing butterflies in the meadow. She misses you. She still waits for you. Asterisk, Lena's face hardened. A flush of irritation rose in her cheeks. He's losing his mind, she scoffed aloud to the opulent, empty silence of her parlor. Speaking to ghosts. This is what comes of sentimentality. She crumpled the paper into a tight, angry ball, the gentle words crushed in her fist. She strode to the marble fireplace and tossed it into the low-burning flames. She watched as the edges blackened, curled, and the words of love and memory turned to fragile, gray ash. As the last corner of the paper was consumed, a sudden, powerful wind howled down her chimney, scattering a shower of sparks onto the hearth and whispering a single, clear, mournful syllable that sounded unmistakably like her name, Lena. A peculiar story began to circulate among the nurses at Pine Breeze during their brief coffee breaks and shift changes. It started as a hesitant whisper from the night nurse and quickly became the home's most intriguing mystery. They spoke of a mysterious white-haired woman. She was always seen during the official visiting hours, sitting silently in the wooden chair beside Elder Tao's bed, her posture graceful and still. She held his hand, and sometimes they seemed to be in quiet conversation, though no one ever heard her speak. She never signed the visitor log at the front desk. She never acknowledged the staff. And she always, without fail, vanished just before the sunset bell rang. No one knew who she was or where she came from. She left no footprints in the mud or snow outside. One evening, Nursin, carrying a fresh set of linens, walked past Elder Tao's open door. From the corner of her eye, she saw the visitor's reflection clearly in the small, tarnished mirror that hung on his wall. She saw the kind, sad eyes, the elegant flow of silver hair over a slender shoulder, the faint smile directed at the old man. But when Nursin turned her head to offer a greeting, the chair was empty. There was no one in the room but Elder Tao, who was looking peacefully at the empty space beside him, his hand resting on the blanket as if it were still being held. Lena was preparing for a soiree, a glittering event where she was to be the guest of honor. Before her grand, gold-leaf mirror, she was arranging her hair, trying a new, sophisticated style. As she reached for a pot of pomade, her hand froze. There, lying in the center of her silk pillow, was a single, perfect white petal. It was identical to the one she had unconsciously noted in her father's letter before burning it. Annoyance, sharp and cold, pricked at her. Had a careless maid brought in flowers from the market? She picked it up, intending to throw it away, but then she caught its scent, a fresh, briny, alive smell like the ocean after a storm. It was the exact same scent from her dream. A shiver, cold and unwelcome, traced a path down her spine. She tossed the petal into her ornate, lacquered wastebasket with a nervous, jerky motion. Later, after the party, as she wearily removed her jewelry, her eyes drifted back to the basket. It was empty. The petal was gone. The window was sealed shut against the night chill. A deep, formless unease settled in the pit of her stomach, a cold stone of dread. That night, the wind outside her window seemed to form words, a soft, sighing, maternal warning that seeped through the glass. Visit him. Visit him before the last bloom falls. The following morning, the memory of the petal and the dream clung to Lena like a stubborn fog. She stood once more before her mirror, this time fastening a necklace of diamonds and sapphires, a recent and extravagant purchase. She was trying to reassure herself with the solid, cold weight of the stones. For a single, heart-stopping second, the reflection that stared back was not her own. The face was ancient, hollow-cheeked, with deep lines of sorrow and time etched mercilessly around the eyes and mouth. The hair was a wild, thin shock of white. The eyes were her mother's eyes, filled with a profound disappointment. She blinked, her breath catching in a painful gasp, and the vision was gone. It was her own smooth, youthful face again, now pale and taut with shock. She staggered back from the mirror, clutching her chest, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Just then, a scream, sharp and genuine, pierced the calm air from the garden below. Lena rushed to the window, her expensive necklace forgotten. Her maid stood amidst her prized, meticulously cultivated rose bushes, her hands clasped over her mouth. Every single flower, which had been in full, glorious, crimson bloom just hours before, was now black, withered, and dead, as if a blight had instantly sucked the very life from them. A nervous young woman in a slightly too large nurse's uniform stood shifting from foot to foot in the polished, intimidating doorway of Lena's boutique. It was Nursin, her conscience, pricked by Elder Tao's fading strength and the strange occurrences, had driven her to make the journey to the city. "Please, Miss Lena," she implored, her voice trembling as she wrung her hands. "You must come see your father. He grows weaker each day. His body fails him. He calls for you every evening when the light fades. And he speaks to the empty chair beside him as if your mother is sitting there, listening. He tells her stories about you. It breaks my heart." Lena's face, which had been a mask of polite inquiry, transformed into a visage of cold fury. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "How dare you come here, to my place of business, and bother me with this superstitious nonsense? My father is old and senile. The fancies of a dying mind are not my concern. Now, get out." She slammed the heavy oak door in the nurse's frightened, retreating face, turning the lock with a definitive click. She leaned against the solid wood, trying to calm her racing heart, trying to drown out the girl's pleading words with the sound of her own ragged breathing. But then she smelled it, a faint, unmistakable, and utterly impossible scent of salt water, creeping under the doorframe, filling the entrance hall with the ghost of the sea. A wild, unnatural storm lashed the mountainside, shaking the very foundations of the Pine Breeze care home. Thunder growled like a great beast, and lightning fractured the sky, illuminating Elder Tao's room in sudden, stark flashes of blinding white. He lay in his narrow bed, breathing in shallow, ragged rasps, his skin pale and waxy against the starched white sheets. Nursin, checking on him hourly, found her own anxiety rising with the storm's fury. Kneeling to check his oxygen tank, her hand brushed against something damp and tangled in the dust beneath his bed. She pulled it out. It was a clump of damp, green, ribbon-like seaweed, smelling fresh and powerfully of the deep ocean. Her blood ran cold. How could it be there? The sea was miles and miles away, over impassable terrain. As another tremendous bolt of lightning lit up the room, throwing everything into sharp, black and white relief, she saw the silhouette of the white-haired visitor standing by the window, looking out at the raging tempest as if it were a summer shower. The figure did not turn, did not acknowledge her, but her whisper filled the small, cold room, clear and calm and absolute above the storm's primal roar. Tomorrow, the voice said, a statement of inevitable fact. Tomorrow she must come, driven not by love or duty or even the chilling warnings, but by a cold, gnawing fear for the inheritance papers she knew her father kept in his small, locked trunk at the foot of his bed. Lena finally decided to visit. "I will go and see what this nonsense is all about," she told her reflection, the face now looking strangely fragile to her own eyes. She packed a small bag with a sense of grim resolution. "And I will secure what is rightfully mine. It is my due for all I have endured." She told herself the dreams, the phantom petal, the aged reflection, the dead roses, they were all symptoms of stress, mere coincidences amplified by a guilty conscience. There was no curse, only consequence, and she was more than ready to face the latter for the sake of the former. As she locked the front door of her mansion and walked toward her car, her heels clicking decisively on the stone path, she glanced one last time at her garden, at the final, blackened, skeletal patch that had once been her most prized rose bush. Before her eyes, the last withered bud, clinging stubbornly to a brittle stem, crumbled. It did not fall to the soil, but dissolved into a fine, gray, scentless ash that was immediately caught and carried away on the indifferent wind. The road to the care home was a narrow, treacherous ribbon carved into the side of the mountain, a path Lena had not traveled since that first stormy day. Today, a thick gray fog had descended, swallowing the world whole, reducing visibility to a few feet of damp, swirling gray. As Lena drove deeper into the high passes, the ancient pine trees seemed to press in on the road, their gnarled, twisted branches like the old, watching arms of judgmental giants. The journey felt longer, older, and more oppressive than she remembered. She turned up the car's heater to its maximum setting, but a deep, bone-chilling cold had settled in her, a frost that no machine could melt. Then, faintly at first, then growing clearer, she heard it, a woman's voice, pure and melodic, humming a simple, haunting lullaby. It was the same one her mother had sung to her every single night of her childhood, a melody woven into the very fabric of her memory. The sound seemed to have no single source. It came from the fog itself, from the trees, from the very vents of her car, surrounding her, enveloping her in a shroud of forgotten love. She gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles standing out white and sharp, her breath coming in shallow pants. The Pine Breeze Care home was eerily, profoundly silent. It was a silence that felt heavy, dense, like a physical presence. No nurses chatted in hushed tones at the central station. No sound of a television or radio drifted from a common room. No muffled coughs or calls came from behind any of the closed doors that lined the long, dim hallway. The only noise was the frantic, runaway drumming of Lena's own heart and the nervous click of her heels on the linoleum floor. A pale, visibly trembling nurse met her at the entrance. The young woman would not meet Lena's eyes. Wordlessly, she gestured for Lena to follow and led her down the long, shadowy hallway to her father's room at the very end. The air was heavy and still, and it carried that now familiar, unsettling scent, a mixture of salt, damp earth, and something else, something like ozone after a lightning strike. "He's been waiting," Nursen whispered, her voice a dry rustle, her eyes wide with a fear she could not name. Before Lena could respond, the nurse turned and almost fled, her footsteps echoing then fading into the oppressive silence. Lena stood alone before the plain, wooden door to room 7. Through its small, wire-reinforced window, she could see the shape of her father lying still in his bed, a small, shrunken form beneath a thin blanket. And she could see another shadow cast on the far wall by the dim bedside lamp, the distinct, graceful, and unmistakably feminine shadow of a woman with long, flowing hair, seated in the chair beside him. Lena pushed the door open, the speech of false concern and pragmatic business she had prepared dying, unspoken, on her lips. The room was cold, a deep, penetrating chill that had nothing to do with the weather outside. Sitting in the wooden chair beside her father, holding his thin, pale hand in both of her own, was a woman. She had long, flowing hair the color of moonlit snow and wore a simple, old-fashioned dress of a style Lena hadn't seen since her earliest childhood. As Lena stood frozen in the doorway, a statue of dread and disbelief, the figure turned. The face was exactly as Lena remembered from her childhood, untouched by the decades, serene and beautiful, yet her eyes held the deep, ancient, bottomless sorrow of the ocean. It was the spirit of her late mother. Her gaze was not one of anger, but of an unbearably profound sadness that seemed to fill the room. She looked directly at her daughter, and her voice, when she spoke, was like the sound of distant waves crashing on a lonely shore. "Why?" she asked, her tone soft, gentle, and yet sharper than any knife. "Did you let him wait alone?" The temperature in the small room plummeted further. Lena could see her own breath pluming in the air in frantic, white puffs. The spirit of her mother rose from the chair, her form seeming to glow with a soft, internal light that cast no shadows. She moved, though her feet did not seem to touch the floor. "Every day he talked to me," she said, her voice echoing slightly, as if coming from the end of a long tunnel. "Every night, he waited for you. He kept your memory alive in this room with his stories when you had forgotten him in your heart." As she spoke, the walls of the small, drab room seemed to lose their solidity, shimmering like a heat haze. Lena could hear the faint, rhythmic crash of waves and see the glint of moonlight on dark, rolling water superimposed over the floral wallpaper. On the bed, Elder Tao stirred. The sound of the spirit's voice seemed to call him back from the edge of sleep. He opened his clouded, milky eyes and looked not at the luminous spirit of his wife, but directly at his trembling, terrified daughter. A single, solitary tear traced a slow, glistening path through the deep wrinkles on his cheek. "Do you see her now, my child?" he whispered, his voice a thread of sound, filled with a strange, heartbreaking mix of pity and love. The spirit glided towards Lena, who was now paralyzed, too terrified to move, to scream, to even look away. Her mother reached out a hand, and though it was composed of light and memory, it felt like solid, burning ice as her ethereal fingers touched Lena's cheek. A jolt of freezing cold shot through Lena's entire body, a cold that seared rather than numbed. "The love you were given," the spirit intoned, her voice now carrying the immense, unassailable weight of a cosmic judgment, was a seed meant to grow, to branch out, to offer shade to those who come after. You let it wither in the dark of your own pride. And so, the law is simple and absolute. Those who forget love will be forgotten by it. As the final, damning words settled in the cold air, Lena's eyes, wide with horror, were drawn to the dark window. The glass, now black as a polished obsidian mirror, no longer showed the night outside. The face staring back was not her own. It was the face from her earlier vision, a very old, hollow-cheeked crone, her skin a web of deep lines, her eyes sunk in pools of shadow, a living portrait of a life stripped of all warmth and connection. A raw, primal scream of pure terror tore itself from Lena's throat. Lena fled from the care home, her movements jerky and uncoordinated. She scrambled into her car, her breath sobbing in her chest, and she drove, heedless of the fog and the twisting road, down the mountain. She did not stop until she was locked inside the perceived safety of her mansion, all the lights blazing. But there was no escape from the judgment that had been passed. That very night, a breathless messenger arrived at her gate. Her main warehouse in the industrial district had mysteriously caught fire, her entire, invaluable inventory of silks and textiles lost to the flames. The next morning, her stern-faced banker came to inform her that her numerous accounts, through a series of sudden, inexplicable, and catastrophic bad investments made in her name, were completely empty. Her household servants, finding her wild-eyed, her hair in disarray, screaming at phantoms in the corners of rooms, packed their bags in fear and left without a word. Exhausted, utterly broken, she finally collapsed into a troubled, nightmare-ridden sleep on the floor of her grand parlor. When she awoke, the morning light harsh and unforgiving, she dragged herself to a mirror. Staring back at her, woven starkly through her beautiful, dark hair, was a thick, undeniable streak the color of stark, snowy white. Her grand house was now a hollow, echoing shell. The silence there was different from the care homes. It was the silence of abandonment, of a life evacuated in a single, terrible night. Dust, the great equalizer, was already gathering on the fine, lacquered furniture and the imported rugs. The air was cold and still. She tried to light a candle against the deepening gloom of the evening, to push back the terrifying shadows, but the flames sputtered and died, again and again, as if the very air in the house rejected its warmth and hope. Seeking some anchor, some connection to a past that now seemed idyllic, she looked up at the wall where the large, oil-painted portrait of her mother, a beautiful, smiling woman in her youth, had always hung. Before her disbelieving eyes, The paints seemed to bleed and run, the vibrant colors draining away, the canvas cracking and flaking until nothing was left but a blank, dusty rectangle on the wall, a ghost of a ghost. She was utterly, completely alone. Then, as if in answer to her utter desolation, a single, softly glowing white petal drifted down from the high, shadowy ceiling, turning slowly, gracefully, in the perfectly still air before landing with the weight of a final verdict on her trembling, open hand. Broken, her pride in ashes, her wealth a fleeting dream, Lena knew there was only one path left, one desperate, unlikely path to redemption. Clutching the crumpled, charred-edged letter from her father, the one she had salvaged from the fireplace days before, its words now a painful mantra in her mind, she began the long, arduous walk back to the Pine Breeze Care home. She had no car, no money for a coach. She walked for 2 days, her fine clothes torn by brambles, her feet raw and blistered, her stomach clenched with a hunger that was more spiritual than physical. She did not eat or drink. Her only sustenance was the desperate, burning need to beg her father's forgiveness, to fall at his feet and weep, to somehow undo the terrible wrong she had committed. She repeated the words over and over in her mind, a prayer of repentance. I'm sorry, Father. I'm sorry. Forgive me. Finally, the familiar, wrought iron gates came into view through the trees. But something was deeply wrong. The home was dark, utterly silent. No friendly light shone in any window. An unnatural, watchful quiet hung over the entire mountainside, a silence that felt like a held breath. Lena pushed the main door of the care home. It swung inward without a sound, revealing a vacant, dark reception area. The hallway beyond was empty and dark. No nurses, no patients, no faint smell of dinner from the kitchens. Her heart began to pound with a terrible, suffocating dread. She ran, her worn-out shoes slapping softly against the linoleum, to her father's room at the end of the hall. The door was ajar. She pushed it open, her breath caught in her throat. The bed was neatly made, the sheets crisp and sterile, and it was empty. The room was stripped bare of all personal effects. No small trunk, no spare clothes, no familiar, worn book on the nightstand. The only thing that remained was her father's simple, familiar wooden walking stick, leaning against the windowsill as if waiting for him to return and take it up for a final, imaginary walk. There was no sign of where he had gone, or who had taken him, no note from a doctor, no forwarding address. The room held only the faint, lingering, salty scent of the sea and a profound, aching emptiness that seemed to suck the very air from Lena's lungs. With trembling, numb hands, Lena crossed the small, empty room and picked up the walking stick. It felt familiar and solid in her grasp, a tangible piece of the father she had lost twice over. As she lifted it, a small, folded piece of paper, tucked neatly beneath where it had rested, fluttered to the floor. She knelt, her joints protesting, and picked it up. She opened it. The handwriting was her father's, but it was strong and clear, infused with a certainty and peace that had been absent from his last letter, not the shaky, frail script of a dying man. It read, "A parent's love does not die. It is as constant as the turning earth. But the heart that forgets love, that allows it to wither, dies first." The simple, profound truth of the words struck her with the force of a physical blow, finally breaking through the last of her pride and defenses. Sobs, great, heaving, uncontrollable waves of pure, unadulterated regret, racked her body. Tears she had not known she could still produce streamed down her newly lined face, washing away the last vestiges of the woman she had been. As she wept, kneeling on the cold floor, a gentle wind from the open window plucked the note from her limp fingers. It danced in the air for a moment, a white butterfly of absolution, before flying out into the vast, open sky, vanishing like a lost prayer into the boundless blue. A soft, familiar, and now comforting voice spoke from directly behind her. "He forgave you," it said, "even before you asked." Lena turned, wiping her tear-streaked face with the back of her hand. Her mother's spirit stood there, but the deep, abiding sorrow in her eyes had been replaced by a profound, luminous peace. A soft, warm, golden light emanated from her, filling the cold, sterile room with the feeling of a gentle, forgiving sunrise. "You have felt the emptiness," the spirit said, her voice now a soothing balm. "You have carried the weight of your choices. Now you must learn that love can heal what regret alone cannot." She reached out and placed a translucent hand directly over Lena's heart. A wave of cleansing, forgiving warmth flowed through Lena, washing away the deep, icy fear that had gripped her soul, melting the frost of her neglect. The rapid, cruel aging that had marred her features halted its relentless march. The lines of sorrow remained, but they were now simply marks of experience, not decay. The spirit's form began to fade, blending into the sunlight that was now streaming through the window, becoming one with the light and the air. As she vanished completely, she left behind a single, perfect, radiant white flower, lying on the bare floorboards where she had stood, a promise and a seed of a new beginning. Lena did not return to the city. There was nothing for her there. She used the small inheritance her father had left her, not money or land, but the deed to the tiny, humble cottage he had been born in, on the edge of the village, and dedicated the rest of her life to service. She became the caretaker, the daughter, for all the village's forgotten elders, those whose own children had left for the distant, glittering cities. She bathed them, fed them, read to them, and listened for hours to their stories. She planted great, sweeping beds of the beautiful, resilient white flowers outside their windows, flowers that bloomed in every season. Her own face was now lined, not with the sharp angles of worry and greed, but with the gentle, soft marks of compassion and hard, meaningful work. Her hands, once soft and manicured, were now calloused and strong, hands that could comfort and build. One evening, after a long day of tending to her charges, she sat on the step of her cottage, watching the sun set behind the mountains. As she closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of pine and earth, she heard a voice as clear and pure as a mountain stream, a voice she would never forget. It was her father's voice, filled with a love that had, indeed, never died. "Now," he whispered into the quiet of her soul, "you understand." Many years later, the villagers found Lena. She was resting peacefully beneath a magnificent, sprawling tree that had grown with astonishing speed beside her cottage, a tree that bloomed with countless, luminous white flowers, their petals glowing softly in the weak winter sun, defying the deep snow that blanketed the ground. Her face was serene, a gentle, contented smile gracing her lips, a look of perfect peace that had eluded her for the first half of her life. A young child, pointing at the vibrant, impossible blossoms, tugged on her grandmother's sleeve, her voice filled with wonder. "Grandmother," the child asked, "why do these flowers never die? Why do they bloom in the cold, when all the other flowers are sleeping?" The old woman, who remembered Lena's arrival in the village all those years ago, a broken, haunted figure, looked down at the child, then at Lena's peaceful form, and finally at the enduring, magical flowers. She smiled, her own eyes full of the hard-won wisdom of a long life. "Because, little one," she said softly, taking the child's hand, "love, once it is truly remembered and given away, never truly fades. It simply finds new ground in which to bloom."